My name is Ralf, and I'm a product engineer at MATTR. In this tutorial, we'll walk through how to configure a MATTR VII tenant to issue an mDoc into a digital wallet using the OID4VCI workflow. OID4VCI stands for OpenID for Verifiable Credential Issuance and is a specification developed by the OpenID Foundation that leverages OpenID protocols to issue credentials of different formats into digital wallets. If you want to learn more about OID4VCI or mDocs, check out the links in the description. Let's start by looking at how the user will experience the flow that we're about to build. We've been provided a credential offer by a credential issuer in form of a QR code. And with our MATTR wallet, we can scan that QR code, and the wallet will understand the offer and tell us what credential is being offered to us and what claims that credential will contain. If we accept the credential offer, we are being redirected to an authentication provider where we have to authenticate ourselves. In this case, Sam Sampleson. And if we successfully authenticate ourselves, we are being issued the credential into our wallet. We can then look at the details of the credential, and we can also use it to present it to a verifier. If you want to follow this tutorial, there are a couple of prerequisites that you need to take care of before you can start. First, you need an authentication provider. In this tutorial, we'll use Auth0. Second, you need access to a MATTR VII tenant. If you don't already have one, there's a link in the description where you can sign up for a free trial. And third, you need a wallet to issue the credential into that supports OID4VCI. We will use MATTR GO Hold for that. Additionally, we recommend you check out our Postman collection. It is not strictly necessary to use it, but it might help speed things up a little for you. Let's go through all the necessary steps to build this experience. We have to configure an Auth0 application to authenticate the user. We have to configure the authentication provider in our MATTR VII tenant to integrate the Auth0 application into the issuance workflow. We have to create an Issuing Authority Certificate Authority, an IACA, which is the root certificate used for signing an mDoc. And we have to create the mDoc configuration itself, which is where we control the structure, the content, and the branding of the credential. Finally, we have to construct the credential offer, which the intended holders can use to start the issuance workflow. As you've seen earlier, this can be rendered as a QR code, which then can be scanned by digital wallets. Let's start with the authentication provider. I already created an Auth0 application called MATTR University, and in the Settings tab, under Basic Information, we can find the domain, the client ID, and the client secret. We need these three values when we configure the authentication provider in our MATTR VII tenant. When we scroll down, we can see that we also have to configure an allowed callback URL. This callback URL consists of your tenant URL and the core v1 OAuth authentication callback path. Though you don't have to remember this value will be part of the response when you configure the authentication provider. Heading over to the users, I also created a sample user to use, Sam Sampleson. And when we configure the authentication provider, we will actually ask for some of the user attributes to be used in the credential. Specifically, we will ask for the name and the email, so whatever value is configured in these fields should end up in the issued credential in the end. This is all we need to do on Auth0, so all the next steps will only be interactions with our MATTR VII tenant. Let's start configuring our MATTR VII tenant now. I'll be using Postman, and I set up an environment with the details for our tenant. This collection also comes with a pre-request script that runs before every request to ensure that we have a valid access token. Of course, you are free to use whatever tool you like, and if you want to get an access token manually, just note that the base URL is different from your tenant URL. To configure an authentication provider, we need those three values again that we saw earlier in the Auth0 application: the URL, the client ID, and the client secret. As you can see, I already copied those values into the request, and for good measure, I used an environment variable for the secret to not expose it here. We can also add additional OpenID Connect scopes to specify what user attributes we are requesting from the auth provider. The OpenID scope is required, but we'll add the profile and the email scope so that we have access to the name and the email of the user. There are some additional parameters that you can configure, but for this tutorial, we can just leave the default values. If we create the authentication provider with this configuration, we can see that the response includes a redirect URL. This should be the same value that we configured in the allowed callback URLs in Auth0. The next step is to create an Issuing Authority Certificate Authority, an IACA. The IACA is the root certificate in the signature of an mDoc. We can customize our IACA, for example, by specifying a common name or the issuing country, but for this tutorial, we'll again use only default values. The IACA that is created is a long-lived certificate. It is valid by default for 10 years. However, the mDocs themselves are not signed by the IACA directly, but by a short-lived intermediate certificate called a document signer. Though you don't have to worry about that, your tenant will take care of creating and managing those document signers for you. Finally, let's create the mDoc configuration itself. We have to configure a document type for the credential. This has to be a unique string, though there are no strict rules on how to format that string. It is recommended to follow a reverse URL style naming. So with our matter.global domain, we would use global.matter.university-credential to make it unique. We can configure the validity of the credential. So in this case, it will expire in 6 months. And then we have the claim mappings. The claim mappings defines the content of the credential. Every credential claim is organized in so-called namespaces, and we also have to give a unique name to those namespaces. So in this case, we'll use global.matter.university.OID4VCI. And then this namespace contains 4 claims called student name, student email, course, and grade. Now, if you remember, we specifically asked the authentication provider for the name and the email of the user because we wanted to use those in the credential itself. And we do that by mapping from an internal claims object where the name and the email from the authentication provider is saved. So we give it a type as well. In this case, all these claims are strings. And for the student name and the student email, we set required to true. So the issuance should actually fail if those values are not present. For the course and for the grade, we define default values. For the grade, because Sam obviously is a very good student, we set it to A+. Finally, we can define some branding for the credential as well to make it a bit individualized and show a nice credential card in the wallet. We give it a name and a description, we provide some background color, and then we can also provide an issuer icon, an issuer logo, and a watermark image. These images need to be provided as data URIs, with the actual image being base64 encoded. Okay, having all of this in order, we can create the credential itself. And we'll see the created credential now has a unique ID, and we will use this ID to create the credential offer in the next step. With our fully configured tenant, we can finally create the credential offer that the holder can use to claim the credential. We only have to provide the ID of the credential configuration that we just created to the credential offers endpoint. As a result, we'll get back a URI that tells the wallet that this is in fact an OpenID credential offer. It contains information about the credential issuer, and it contains the credential ID itself. If we turn this URI into a QR code, we can scan it with our wallet. And we can see that we are being offered the MATTR University credential and that the claims inside contain the grade, the course, the student name, and the student email. If we agree, we have to authenticate with the authentication provider. In this case, it's Sam Sampleson, so let's fill in the email address and password. We are successfully authenticated, and we claimed the credential. We can see the credential here with the watermark image and the issuer logo, and inside it has the student email of samsampleson.com and the student name of Sam Sampleson. Congratulations! You just configured an end-to-end OID4VCI issuance journey to issue an mDoc into a digital wallet. While we focused on a very basic OID4VCI flow, you can use MATTR VII to create rich and complex issuance experiences, for example by integrating custom components via interaction hooks, or by retrieving data from compatible data sources to be used in the credential. Make sure to check out our resources on MATTR Learn and reach out if you've got comments or questions. Thank you for watching.